Chicago Blackhawks legend Corey Crawford had his number 29 sweater retired by the Rockford IceHogs over the weekend. And on today's episode, I'll get into some of my favorite Crawford memories from over the years, as well as a preview of tonight's matchup against the Canucks. And I'll also be getting into a early trade deadline preview outlining all the Blackhawks options. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. And a quick reminder to go and smash that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. Go and subscribe for Celebrini. That's the new motto we got going around here. And also, if you're a frequent audio listener, make sure to be consistently downloading those episodes. Go and rate and review the podcast as well. That would help me out tremendously. And go and show some love to my personal page on X at Jack Bushman 2. You can follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey as well. And also, today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, I got to let you all know, is sponsored by FanDuel, the best place to bet on the NBA. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to start earning bonus bets with any $5 winning money line bet at America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone's day is off to a good start thus far. The Blackhawks are back in action tonight, taking on the Vancouver Canucks for the third and final time this season. The top team in the entire NHL. It is going to be another tough test for the Chicago Blackhawks, but they just kind of passed their last tough test, I would say, on Friday night with flying colors, even though they fell and came out on the wrong end of that final outcome, losing 4-3 in overtime. Still a very impressive fight against the New York Rangers, one of the top teams out in the Eastern Conference as well. And through two meetings this year against the Vancouver Canucks, the Blackhawks have actually hung in there pretty good. I'll be getting into more of that during segment 2, so make sure to stay tuned till that point of the episode if you want to hear a little bit more about tonight's matchup. But what I wanted to open up today's episode with Blackhawks fans is we got a Crow sighting. Corey Crawford over the weekend had his number 29 sweater retired by the Rockford IceHogs. Some of you may forget that's actually the number that he wore consistently before arriving to the NHL scene. He had his number 29 sweater retired by the Moncton Wildcats of the QMJHL not that long ago as well. And yeah, good to just see Corey Crawford back in public, back interacting with people, back being out there, because really since his retirement, we just haven't seen him all that frequently. I know he came out for Marian Hossa's jersey retirement at the UC, but still didn't really see a ton of him. He mentioned in a conversation that he had with Scott Powers of The Athletic, an article that Scott dropped just a couple of days ago. Crawford mentioned that he was at Rocky Wirtz's funeral, but we just really haven't seen him all that much since he was forced to retire due to post-concussion-like symptoms. And if you remember, after he didn't sign that contract with the Blackhawks, he actually signed a 2-year deal with the New Jersey Devils and looked like he was going to continue his playing career there before, just before the start of training camp, ultimately ended up announcing his retirement. And it was interesting reading that article that Scott posted where he just had a conversation with Crow asking him about everything. I apologize, Blackhawks fans. My light in the background is going a little crazy. I'm going to unplug this real quick and plug this back in and hope it gets a little bit better. Apologies for the interruption here, but that light was going a little bit absurd and I had to fix it or else it was going to drive me crazy. But yeah, in that interview that Crawford had with The Athletic, he kind of mentioned that it just became too much for him. And he, was on a lot of medication, benzos, he was saying, really kind of messed him up. And he said he almost lost his mind a little bit. So sounded like Corey Crawford was really going through a lot. That's what I kind of assumed he was dealing with through all that situations. And he said he's got a real bad back. So yeah, it's just been a kind of tough road for Corey Crawford the last couple of years, but it feels like he's on the upswing. He's starting to get out there more, enjoying life. He has kids. And he just said kind of before he wanted to go and do those things, he wanted to be more of a family man and take care of his kids and make sure that they were set up with everything before he kind of got back out there. But now it does feel like it could be the start of seeing Corey Crawford a little more frequently, which is great for everyone because he seriously is a Blackhawks legend, and I don't think they would have won either of those two Stanley Cups without Corey Crawford. And I know when we think about underrated pieces from those Blackhawks teams, Nicholas Hjalmarsson is kind of the one that comes to mind. I still think Corey Crawford is the unsung hero of the Chicago Blackhawks, man. His career numbers were fantastic, and he got critiqued more than anyone on that Blackhawks team did, really unfairly, I thought. And every time it was a big game situation, Corey Crawford stood up to the challenge. And after 2011, 2012, when he kind of had those hiccups early on in the league, he really was one of the best goaltenders in the entire NHL. And even at the end of his career, during the COVID bubble, we got to see what kind of player he still was at the latter stages of his career. And man, I always did everything I could to defend Corey Crawford. If I heard someone nagging him or giving him a hard time, I always made sure to stand up for Crow because I always thought he was excellent and the true underrated part of those latter two Blackhawks Stanley Cup teams. Because as Eddie Olczyk always said, if you don't have goaltending, you don't stand a chance. And we were blessed to have a goaltender like Corey Crawford in net. Yeah, those Blackhawks teams were absolutely loaded. You still need a good goaltender to get through those 4 rounds and to lift the trophy and be that one team still surviving when it's all said and done. And without Corey Crawford, I truly don't believe the Blackhawks would have been able to accomplish both of those Stanley Cup championships. So great to see Crow in the limelight. Great to see him getting some recognition. The first player to ever have his jersey number retired by the Rockford IceHogs. And he probably is the greatest member of the Rockford IceHogs, considering what he did there and what he went on to do at the next level for the Blackhawks. So congratulations to Crow for that honor, for also having his jersey retired by the Moncton Wildcats not that long ago too. And I hope to see more of Corey Crawford at the United Center and just interacting with the Blackhawks organization more in the future. I know things didn't end on the best terms, and he even kind of outlined that. He said he was crying like a baby when he didn't receive a contract offer from the Blackhawks, and he still really hasn't talked to Stan Bowman about that decision. And he said, he wished it could have gone differently, and he felt like he could have pushed a little bit more to get a contract, but it just never ended up happening. But we know Stan Bowman is no longer in charge of this Blackhawks team, and in my opinion, should never be in charge of any professional hockey team ever again. Maybe that will make Crawford's transition back with the Blackhawks organization a little bit easier. I would think it would if I had to guess, and I hope that is the case because, again, I think seeing more of Crow at the UC, attending games, just being involved with the organization again, I think it just feels right considering everything he's done for this franchise. So I hope this is the start of more types of stuff like this for number 29 in Rockford and number 50 in the big leagues for Chicago, Corey Crawford. But before I move on, I did want to go over some of my favorite Corey Crawford memories over the years because he was good for a bunch of them. And go and drop in the comment section down below right now, Blackhawks fans, your favorite Corey Crawford memories, or when you just think of Crow, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I really want to see what all of you out there are thinking as well. But I have a list of a handful of good memories that I enjoyed from Corey Crawford over the years. Number one to me was the Game 6 shutout against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was phenomenal all throughout those playoffs, but in those last couple of games, absolutely stellar. And then for him to go and show that performance in Game 6, I remember him stopping Steven Stamkos on a breakaway, I want to say early in the second period. Tremendous in Game 6 and a fitting ending to that last Stanley Cup championship for the Blackhawks, right? We get Duncan Keith, an iconic member of the Blackhawks, probably the greatest defenseman of his era, in my opinion, and someone who really changed the game on the back end. He scores the game winner. Patrick Kane, Blackhawks legend, gets the insurance goal, and Corey Crawford, the stud in that, pitches the shutout to help the Blackhawks win their third Stanley Cup in the last 6 years, and his second as a member of that team in 2015 to beat the Lightning 2-0. So that's one of my favorite moments from Crow of all time. Absolutely. Number two is the 2013 Stanley Cup playoffs, because to me, Blackhawks fans, I love when Patty Kane wins the Conn Smythe, but This one should have gone to Corey Crawford for how good he was in the 2013 Stanley Cup playoffs. Look at these numbers. Started all 23 games that the Blackhawks had in that postseason, had a 1.84 goals against average and a 932 save percentage in 23 games. I quite honestly don't know how Corey Crawford didn't win the Conn Smythe in 2013. Got robbed there a little bit and only adds to the underrated part throughout his career. I firmly believe that he should have been the Conn Smythe winner there in 2013. Another favorite classic Corey Crawford moment was when he stood up for Jonathan Toews in that series in 2013 against the Los Angeles Kings. Kyle Clifford, I remember, was kind of giving Toews a couple extra shots there, and Corey Crawford goes and grabs him right around the neck and stands up for his teammate because Corey Crawford wasn't ever going to take no shit. And we saw that a couple of times throughout his career as well. One of my favorite memories too from Crow is when he wanted to fight Robbie Fabry in that 2016 first round series against the Blues. He's going and checking Robbie Fabry after the whistle against the glass, and the Blackhawks fans at the UC were going absolutely bananas with chants of Corey. That was a great one. We got robbed of a potential goalie fight in 2014 against Jonathan Quick. If you all remember, after the second period, a little bit of a chippy game. Corey Crawford skating to center ice, shaking his glove hand, looking at Quickie a little bit like, you want to drop him, bud? Because I will. Unfortunately, Jonathan Quick didn't agree to that duel as he kind of chickened out, if you will. But Corey Crawford was always willing to stand up for his teammates and always willing to mix it up to get the crowd and his boys going. And that's what I loved about him. He played with so much fire and so much energy. And it felt like when he had that kind of motivation on his shoulder, that's really when he played his best as well. I miss those types of moments from Corey Crawford. Also, his kind of one final saving grace, his Cinderella story to kind of wrap up his career. We didn't realize it at the time, but this was the last we were going to see of peak Corey Crawford. And that was in the 2020 COVID bubble against the Edmonton Oilers. He was outstanding, and he stopped 43 of 45 shots in Game 5 against Edmonton to win that series. And then also, if you remember, the Blackhawks went on to face the Vegas Golden Knights in that next round. They got absolutely dog-walked. But the one game they won in that series was Game 4 to stay alive. Corey Crawford stopped 48 of 49 shots to keep the Blackhawks season alive for a couple of more days there. That series against Edmonton against Vegas undoubtedly would have been a sweep without Corey Crawford. And whenever we think of Crow, I think a lot of people are going to think about the speech at the 2013 Blackhawks Stanley Cup parade with the effing right Chicago to start off his speech, and talking about how they're the biggest bunch of beauties in the league. They worked their nuts off to get to this point. Absolutely hilarious vintage moment there from Corey Crawford. I don't know how much he actually remembers it at the time, but an absolutely electric moment from Corey Crawford that I think made him even more beloved here with the Chicago Blackhawks. And also, career numbers just so underrated, criminally underrated throughout his career. A 2.45 goals against average, 918 save percentage in the regular season with 260 wins in 488 games. And I would argue he was even better when it mattered the most in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And his career in the Stanley Cup playoffs, he had a 918 save percentage and a 2.38 goals against average. I don't know how people were ever talking bad against Corey Crawford, because those numbers are simply outstanding. And again, without him, I really don't think those Stanley Cups in 2013 and 2015 are possible. Some of my also favorite memories, I almost forgot about these. Just anytime he played the Montreal Canadiens, his hometown team, it seemed like he would ball out of control. He was 10-2-2 in his career against the Canadiens with a 9.56 save percentage, was 6-0-2 in 8 career games in Montreal. And again, like I said, whenever he kind of had that extra chip on his shoulder, that's when it seemed like he played at his best. And fortunately for us Blackhawks fans, Corey Crawford was the one in net for the Blackhawks during a lot of meaningful playoff games. And even though there were some people that never trusted him and again kind of badmouthed him incorrectly, look at the numbers. I don't understand how people ever really talked bad about this guy. Maybe because it was the one spot where, I mean, goalie's a tough position. You know, you're going to have some bad games out there. And it felt like Blackhawks fans always were harder on Corey Crawford than they were on anyone else. But we were lucky to have him in net. And again, I hope we start to see Corey Crawford more involved with the Blackhawks organization moving forward, because he was such a pivotal piece. And I doubt he'll ever get his number 50 sweater retired with the Chicago Blackhawks. But even if that doesn't end up happening, there's no doubting the legend status that he's earned for all the big game performances that he's had. So one more time, shout out to Corey Crawford for an incredible career. Shout out to Corey for getting his sweater retired in Rockford over the weekend. It looked like a really cool festivity there, and hope to see more of Corey Crawford back at the UC sometime soon. All right, there are my thoughts on Corey Crawford getting out in the spotlight for the first time in a couple of years. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll get into a quick preview of tonight's matchup with the Vancouver Canucks. But first, I need to talk to you all about FanDuel. The NBA season is taking over. You can go and get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because now that the NFL season has wrapped up, basketball is going to take over. So there's no better time to go and place a wager on your favorite players or your favorite teams, because right now, when you go and sign up, if you're a new customer, go and visit fanduel.com/lockedon, and you could earn $150 worth of bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. And you can use these bonus bets to bet on everything from player props to over-unders, money lines, same game parlays, live bets, and much, much more, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. NBA is taking over here now that the NFL season has wrapped up, so there's no better time to go and place a wager on LeBron James, Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, or some of your other favorite players across the NBA, because again, if you sign up today and visit fanduel.com/lockedon, you can start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. All you have to do is win any $5 money line bet, and you'll get $150 worth of bonus bets credited into your account, and you can use these bonus bets to bet on everything. So again, go and visit fanduel.com/lockedon to start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's fanduel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Blackhawks play the Vancouver Canucks at the United Center tonight. That's a 7:30 p.m. Central Time puck drop, the third and final meeting between these two teams here in the regular season. And you can go and catch all of the Blackhawks hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. All you have to do is go and search Blackhawks. Segment 2, I did want to be sure to preview this game against the Vancouver Canucks a little bit, since the Hawks are trying to build off of their impressive showing on Friday night against the New York Rangers. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the top teams in the entire Eastern Conference. Even though the Blackhawks didn't come out on top, it was a really respectable fight there late in the third period to force overtime. And they scored more than 0 or 1 goals for the first time in seemingly ever. So that was a certainly welcome change of pace. But tonight, it's not going to get any easier for this Blackhawks bunch, as they're facing the top team in the NHL, believe it or not, in the Vancouver Canucks, who currently have 76 points and are 35-12-6 through 53 games this season, currently 8 points ahead of the defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights for the top seed out in the Pacific Division. But despite the large discrepancy between these two teams in the standings, the Canucks are at the top, Blackhawks are right there at the bottom. The Hawks have actually played the Canucks pretty well so far in the prior two meetings. The first matchup was back at the United Center. The Canucks did win that one 4-3, but the Hawks fought hard all the way until the end. Bedard had a goal in the third period to cut that deficit down to 1. And if you go and look at the box score, they actually really came with a hard surge in the third period to outshoot the Canucks 28-26 for the game. And the second meeting was kind of the same. It was actually just before the All-Star break, so you don't have to think back too long ago, but the Hawks got off to a dreadful start. The Canucks were firing on all cylinders early. They took a 2-0 lead in the opening 7 minutes, but the rest of the way, the Blackhawks were really sharp. They just unfortunately couldn't score, but for the second consecutive time against the Canucks, they outshot them. The advantage was 31-29 in favor of the Blackhawks. So, look, I'm not saying I expect the Blackhawks to go out there and win this game tonight. That's probably too much to ask for. But if I was head coach Luke Richardson, I'm really challenging this bunch to go out there on home ice and make this a competitive game against the top team in the NHL for the third time this season. And build off of that performance that they had on Friday against, again, one of the better teams in the NHL as well. And if they can get off to a better start, that was really the only thing that plagued them in the last meeting up in Vancouver, was they just weren't ready to go right off of the rift. And it was kind of like their performance against the Minnesota Wild to kick off the post All-Star break. The Blackhawks need to be ready to go right from the opening faceoff. And if they do that, I like their chances of making this a hard-fought, close game throughout the course of 60 minutes. And I think that will help them set the tone throughout the rest of the game if they get off to that fast start and don't fall behind like they did last time against Vancouver. So look, I don't know if the Blackhawks are going to win, but I certainly think they're capable of hanging in there with the Vancouver Canucks. And it would be pretty disappointing to me if this one got really lopsided based on how well the Hawks played in their last time out. But getting into the lineup we could see against the Canucks tonight, not a whole lot of changes, so I'm going to go through this real quick. Foligno, Kurashev, and Tyler Johnson actually has been bumped up to the top line right wing spot as it looks based on practice yesterday at Fifth Third Arena. Colin Blackwell, Jason Dickinson, and Joey Anderson remain together as the second line. Lucas Reichel, Mackenzie Entwistle, and Taylor Radish are the third line, so it appears. I hate that Lucas Reichel is still having Mackenzie Entwistle as his center, but at least Taylor Radish is there, even though he hasn't had a very good season either. I don't know how that's going to lead to better results for Lucas Reichel, so don't really love that trio. And then Boris Kachuk, Reese Johnson, and Ryan Donato are serving as the fourth line, with Rem Pitlick and Zach Sanford looking to be the extras. Alex Vlasic and Seth Jones, the shutdown pairing for the Blackhawks, the only two that are really, really reliable right now as a duo, are the top pairing. Kevin Korchinski and Jacob Megna, I do think have been solid, but Korchinski still kind of learning things on the fly, not on the fly, but just still having to be a work in progress in the defensive zone is kind of what I'd say. And then Isaac Phillips and Louis Crevier, just kind of hold your breath whenever they're out there on the ice, but the Blackhawks don't have a choice because Connor Murphy, Jared Tenorti, and Nikita Zaitsev all are injured at this point in time. So those are the 6 defensemen the Blackhawks have left to roll with. And then Peter Mrazek looks like he's going to get the start here in net. Yeah, I know it's not an ideal defensive situation against a really good offensive Canucks bunch, but this is what the Blackhawks are left with. And hey, they've been fighting really hard and they have the right mentality coming from in that locker room. So hopefully they'll be able to keep it close here tonight against the Canucks and give the fans on tap at the United Center a good game to be in attendance for. All right, there are my thoughts on tonight's game with Vancouver. Coming up in just a moment. Don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans, because I still have to get into a 2024 trade deadline preview for the Chicago Blackhawks. But first, I need to talk to you all about Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Connor Bedard could be on his way back and still could win the Calder Trophy for NHL Rookie of the Year. Austin Matthews could be on his way to potting 60 goals, and the Vancouver Canucks could be on their way to winning the President's Trophy, and you could be winning alongside all of them by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. And Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you have the chance to win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. And all you have to do is simply pick whether studs like Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, or Austin Matthews will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for goals, assists, points, shots, and more in any given game. And again, Sleeper offers you the chance to win 100 times your cash. So start paying attention, make the right picks, and you could be winning real big. And right now, you can also go and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get up to an $100 match on your first deposit with Sleeper. And if you only want to deposit $20 or $50, Sleeper will still match you on any amount up to $100. So go and check it out right now. Again, that's the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps, and go and see Sleeper's terms of use if you're wanting more details. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're still tuned into this point of today's episode, as always, thank you very much. I really do appreciate all of your support. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure to help me out by smashing the like button, commenting down below, and subscribing for Celebrini. And also make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Plus, our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3, before I wrap things up today, we are now officially less than 1 month away from the 2024 NHL trade deadline, which this year lands on Friday, March 8th. So just over 3 weeks away, Blackhawks fans. And I wanted to be sure to get into an outline of all the possibilities that we could see from general manager Kyle Davidson this year. Although based on the moves that he has already made and just kind of the word going around the Chicago Blackhawks organization, I certainly don't expect them to be as active as they've been in the past few years, just because they really don't have that many pieces to be bargaining with now that they've signed Jason Dickinson, Peter Mrazek, and Nick Foligno to contract extensions. And I know there are some people out there who disagreed with those moves and felt like the Blackhawks could have flipped any one of those three players for potential prospects or even more future draft picks. But the one thing I will say about that quickly is just go and look at cap friendly. Go and look at all the draft picks the Blackhawks already have over the next 3 years. For the 2024 draft, they have 2 first-round selections, 3 second-round picks. In 2025, they have 2 first and 2 seconds. And then in 2026, they also have 1 first and 3 seconds. So they already are pretty much loaded on draft capital. Yeah, you can go and add some more, but at some point in time, there is a problem with having too many prospects in the organization. You can only have a certain amount of guys under contract. So look, the Blackhawks already have stockpiled enough draft picks, and they just don't really have their hands forced to go and get those picks anymore because of all of them that Kyle Davidson has been able to accumulate since he's taken over the job. And we're undoubtedly going to need some veterans to guide all of these youngsters along the way as well. And that's why Mrazek, Dickinson, and Foligno all got 2-year deals, short-term deals, because it's still going to be a long-term process for this Blackhawks team to open up that competitive window again and to compete for the Stanley Cup playoffs. It looks like we're still at least 2 years away removed from that. So, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be the most active trade deadline from the Blackhawks, but I do think there are a couple pieces that could be intriguing for other teams. 2 of them probably more so than others here, but again, kind of only 2 options I feel like for the Blackhawks. One is Tyler Johnson, he's actually the highest paid forward on the Blackhawks right now. I think him and Andreas Athanasiou actually I think is the highest paid forward on the Blackhawks, other than Taylor Hall. But both of those guys are injured. Tyler Johnson's healthy. He's the highest paid forward on the active roster right now. He's got 1 year left on his current deal before becoming an unrestricted free agent with a $5 million cap hit. And so far in 37 games this season, he's got 13 points, 9 goals, and 4 assists. Undoubtedly, the Blackhawks would have to retain half of that $5 million AAV if they were wanting to move Johnson or if another team was interested in him, because we're still in this post-COVID era and the salary cap hasn't gone up yet. So no one's going to be taking on Tyler Johnson for $5 million. The Blackhawks would have to give up more assets for another team to do that. But at $2.5 million on an expiring contract, maybe there's a little bit more desire there for other teams to go and acquire a piece like that. And maybe even there could be a third team involved to get that AAV down to $1.25 million. So I do think Johnson could be an intriguing veteran add for someone. The one thing I will say about that is he's been very injury plagued since coming to the Blackhawks. So I do wonder if another team or another general manager worries about giving up assets for him and then him getting hurt and not really being able to help the team whatsoever. I do wonder if that's a concern at all. But if the Blackhawks were able to at least split this AAV in half at $2.5 million, I think maybe they could get a 3rd-round pick for Tyler Johnson. It's not the most intriguing offer in the world, but you do have to consider there are going to be some pieces starting to come up and arrive in the NHL year after year. I don't know if there's going to be that many more next year. Still feels like it's a long-term process. So I don't know how Kyle Davidson is kind of shaping up this forward group as of right now. But if there's a 3rd-round pick out there offered for Tyler Johnson, I feel like he probably should take it. But But that's just me personally. We'll see what ends up happening with Johnson. We'll see if there's even any interest, but I do believe he's one of the only candidates, one of the most likely candidates if the Blackhawks do make moves to get dealt to another NHL club. The other likely option, I feel like Blackhawks fans, is Colin Blackwell. And since he's returned from that injury, which kept him out for almost a year's time, the numbers aren't, anything that jump off of the page. He's got 6 points in 22 games this year, but that work ethic and that intensity and that energy, he brings that night in and night out. And he's also got a little bit of physicality to him. Yeah, he's certainly a bottom six, fourth line piece for a Stanley Cup contender, but he's only, his cap hit's only at $1.2 million. And I feel like that's manageable enough where another team could have some interest in adding a depth forward, a guy who could play on the penalty kill like Colin Blackwell. So I do think there could be some intrigue in Colin Blackwell. The one problem with that is I feel like he's also a guy that Kyle Davidson might want to bring back on another one-year deal for next season because he is a good veteran guy and he goes about his business on the ice the right way and really seems like he's trying to make the most of this opportunity after having hockey removed from his life for almost a year. So I do feel like Blackwell is a re-sign candidate for the Blackhawks, and maybe that prevents Kyle Davidson from trading him if there is interest out there. But kind of like Tyler Johnson, I think there's no way the Blackhawks are going to get a second-round pick for Colin Blackwell, and they might not even get a third, but if they are offered a third, I think that's a deal you absolutely have to take. But I will admit, like a fourth-round pick is probably the more likely return for a guy of the caliber of Colin Blackwell. Ryan Donato could also maybe be an option for someone out there, but he does have 2 years left compared to Johnson and Blackwell only having 1 year left on their current deal. Donato is, though, signed on at just $1.2 million, so it's not like it's a huge contract to take on for these next 2 years, and he's been pretty effective this year all up and down the lineup. We've seen him playing top 6 minutes from time to time. We've seen him in the bottom 6. 14 points in 48 games, a guy with good goal scoring abilities that can play in the bottom 6 and is a little bit of a Swiss Army knife out there. So I do think there could be some interest in Ryan Donato. I don't know if the 2-year deal is going to push anyone away. I'm going to throw this guy out here. I don't think it's going to happen, but Taylor Radish is a pending restricted free agent at the end of the year. I don't think it would be a smart time for the Blackhawks to trade him because he only has 11 points in 47 games this year after being a 20-goal scorer for the first time in his career last year. And I was always maybe higher on Taylor Radish than most people. I knew it was going to be a challenge for him to hit 20 goals again, but selling him right now, I do think would be a dumb choice from the Blackhawks because his value is definitely down. But it is also going to be interesting to see what the Blackhawks give him and how his next deal kind of shapes up if he doesn't kind of pick up his production here down the stretch of the regular season. Not likely, but I wanted to throw Taylor Radish out there. Connor Murphy is another option as well, but his deal is even more complicated than Ryan Donato's because he has 3 years left at $4.4 million. And on a Stanley Cup contender, Murphy is probably number 4 through number 5 defenseman, and $4.4 million is pretty expensive for a guy of that caliber. And I don't think the Blackhawks would want to retain money on that deal because it is so long and could possibly hinder their decisions in the future. So undoubtedly, I think the 3 most likely candidates for the Blackhawks heading into the trade deadline this year are Tyler Johnson, Colin Blackwell, and Ryan Donato. But in all honesty, Blackhawks fans, I wouldn't be shocked if none of them get traded. The Blackhawks are trying to get a little bit healthier and I think trying to put together a good stretch of hockey at the end of the season. I know as a fan that might sound terrible because we'd love for them to get the number 1 overall pick and Macklin Celebrini again this year. But I do think they're looking longer term than that. Ow, I just banged my toe against the chair and it hurt real hard. I don't know if anyone heard about that. But I do think they're going to be trying to play better hockey here in the second half as opposed to tanking kind of like they were last year. So yeah, I do think there are options out there for the Blackhawks, and it's going to be interesting to see if Kyle Davidson winds up pulling the trigger on any of those guys that I just outlined. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and give me a follow on X at JackBushman2, and you can also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talk talking hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.